Hi, my name is David Bradley, and this is from the Mind of a Mystic podcast on the Schizophrenic Forms channel. We're going to go today into part 2 of my series, Enlightenment After the Abyss, and we're going to discuss a term I think I made up, which is called radical subjectivity, and then I'm going to address the incredible response that I had to my first video. Blown away, kind of nervous, kind of excited that I've had such an amazing response on the previous video in this series, and I hope sincerely that what follows does justice to that previous video, because you all clearly loved it, and I'm deeply thankful and appreciative of the comments, the likes, the response and shares and everything that I've had with the video, because it blew my mind. So let's dive into part 2, radical subjectivity. So radical subjectivity, I probably need to put a bit of background into me as a person before I move on, so we're going to preface a little bit by discussing in as little detail and lack of minutiae as possible my personal history. So I'm diagnosed with schizophrenia. I had a psychotic episode that lasted a couple of years and then took about 6 years to fully snap out of in around 2007, 2008. And in a nutshell, the experience of being able to hallucinate so vividly that I experienced alternate realities that seemingly didn't track with this one but were intimately related to this one led me to question, as a matter of course, what is it that I can confirm completely to be real at all, at any level of reality? Because when you're constantly presented with hallucinations, alternate realities, non-physical entities, like this has been happening since I was 5 years old, and then when I had the psychosis, it became a far more extreme and integrated part of my life. And basically, what I was trying to do was go down to the lowest point of my consciousness that I could find, where I could say that is me and that exists, and then regenerate my entire fractured psyche, which just completely collapsed in a kind of shamanic initiation type awakening process, which was labelled psychosis, but I'm not entirely questioning of that, but there's another category of mental disturbance called spiritual emergency, which I'm probably more apt. I'm not sure, but basically I tried to figure out what if anything I could say was measurably real, and then that led me to question what real even means, and what can be said for certain about my experience. And that led me to what I later discovered was solipsism. So I spent a long time in those first 6 years of this massive breakthrough experience, which I'm by necessity not going into because it's very upsetting, trying to reconcile myself with the fact that I had telepathic experiences, I had visionary experiences, I had wild hallucinations that seemed to, rather than not correlate with reality, correlate perfectly with reality, and that was what made it so jarring. And so it led me, as I was saying, to like a solipsistic perspective. The idea that the only thing I could confirm was that I myself was having an experience of reality. And then, as stated in the previous video, it's like everything else that's happening that I am aware of in my own identity, my own self, my own individual consciousness, everything else that has ever happened to me, any other knowledge extrapolated, is a secondary source to the assumption that I am having an experience, that I am conscious. So where my identity is taking place, my identity. So I've studied loads of Buddhist meditation techniques as well. It's like you go further and further down, and you do this self-inquiry. You try to look into yourself and find the ground of being. And I wasn't wanting in that, I didn't come up wanting. I found something there, and from there I was able to rebuild my identity into this reality once more, and sort of rebuild an ego, rebuild an identity, basically. And it's sort of, I'm very nervous talking about this publicly, but here we are. It led me to the conclusion that my only first-hand data is subjective. The only reason I know anything, any other layer of experience of reality is happening contingent and dependent upon the fact that I myself am experiencing a reality. Therefore, the only rational conclusion that makes that make sense is that subjectivity is the only thing we can confirm. We are a subject observing reality. Everything else happening, whether you think it's in your brain, your mind, your consciousness, your spirit, your soul, any delineation down or up from the fact that you're having an experience, by nature of self-observation, dictates that everything else happening in reality is dependent on your subjective experience. Does it exist objectively outside of you? That's a baseline assumption that people have about reality that is informed by their subjective experience. This is the thing that's so hard to articulate without sounding a bit insane, but it's like everything you've ever experienced, anything you've ever known, anything that's ever happened to you has been subjective, and then you infer the objectivity of the external world, and it's that kind of like subject becomes object in that sort of Buddhist enlightenment awakening state of consciousness, the gamma wave state. It's like all that you are is a result of what you've thought, and then all that you have thought is a result of your own subjective individual witnessing self. So I'm going to just calm because I'm literally shaking with excitement, so I'll be back momentarily. So the concept that I'm terming or coining as radical subjectivity, I'm basically outlining the fact of what I just explained. It's the idea that we have an assumption about what our place in the universe is, and that it seems more and more compelling to me the longer I try and analyse it, disprove it, and dismiss that notion that the ground of being is our own awareness of reality. I argued, I think in the previous video, I was saying that there has never been, in your experience, there's never been a continuity of consciousness, a discontinuity of consciousness. You're either asleep and you remember, you're either asleep, which you don't remember, and you might remember dreams, or you might remember your waking state in the dream state. Even as a lucid dreamer, so lucid dreaming is taking your waking identity into the dream world, which yields just unbelievable states of consciousness that rival even that of DMT and other levels of altered states of consciousness. It's like very hard to stay coherent. It's almost as if your assumption that you were ever unconscious is based on memories. It's all memory oriented. I sort of laid this out previously. Like, how do you know what happened in the past is your memory? If you didn't have memory, which happened to me like on many years ago, as hinted with the Bill Hicks video at the start of the video, everything that's ever happened to me was dislocated by a massive dose of LSD, and I had that memory of the fact that, I was eternal, that I was never born, I'll never die, I'm one consciousness, everything that exists in the known universe is just an extension or an expansion or a framework within which I exist. And you could kind of argue it, like even in neuroscience, which is based in this reality, that studying the brain, even in context of this reality, suggests that it's just a projected hallucination of the mind or the brain, right? That what we're experiencing of reality is a controlled hallucination, and that, like, I know from first-hand experience that you can break that illusion through altered states of consciousness. And then the first most significant thing that happened was I realised that I was eternal, an eternal one consciousness. Now, obviously, I was on acid when this happened, so make of that as you will. But once you realise that it's even possible to attain that state, it starts to invert reality. You start to question many assumptions, like, and any assumptions you have about reality can be questioned once you realise that perception is governed by expansion and belief. You perceive as you believe as you perceive. It's like everything you know is determined by consciousness, as your state of consciousness, and memory, basically. I'm trying to ground myself again as I'm talking. I'm very, very excited to be making this video. 1 second. So the ground of consciousness in which we in which all of the phenomena exist is subjective. So radical subjectivity is basically the idea that reality is inverted. We assume that we are a consciousness experiencing an objective world, but the objective world is a projection of consciousness, and that even within the vast, vivid hallucination of reality, that reality itself insists that we are experiencing we're an electromagnetic orb of consciousness moving through a field of infinite consciousness that, like the electromagnetic spectrum, is probably far vastly different from what we perceive. We're an organism, we're a humanoid organism in a material universe that is by necessity based on the survival needs of the organism, and anything basically, so any evidence you might ask for, any objective fact about reality that is taking place in what we know to be, even by the terms of the reality, a controlled hallucination that is by necessity inaccurate, potentially even false. So I'm going to come back with some more grounded thoughts. I get so excited when talking about this. I'm literally shaking with adrenaline because it's my favourite topic. Basically, right, radical subjectivity is the argument inferred by solipsism, but with the next stage of logic and cognition applied to it. It's more like the rational conclusion of solipsism. Continuity of consciousness came up in the last section. Everything other than what's happening in the immediate moment, which is all you can possibly be aware of, which is what I'm arguing, either exists in memory or prediction. Memory, prediction, memory, prediction. The fact that we know who we are is because we're inhabiting a body which the neural structures of which, so is it medulla oblongata? I can't remember right now. Mediates our sense of identity. So when I had this massive breakthrough acid dose, where I realised I was one consciousness, all part of one infinite, unending expansion of the breath in and breath out of the universe, and it was one of the most phenomenologically bizarre states I've ever been in. And as someone who's had psychosis, that's saying something. Radical subjectivity is sort of saying that everything else arises from the individual consciousness, and that memory is the key function to that. I made this argument in the last video that everything, if you were to inhabit my body, if you were to transplant the core of your identity into my personality, had my perspective, had my body, had my memory, had my brain, had my environment, all of that, you would, for all intents and purposes, be me. It's the same inhabiting light, that, and all of that is contingent on memory. So a good thought experiment is if you were to actually track down through your thoughts, do you ever, because you don't remember being asleep when you're unconscious, and then there's a hazy amnesiac filter that goes on between unconscious and conscious, have you ever actually slept or been unconscious in your entire life? No, you haven't. The environment's changed, the objective world has moved on a certain period of time, but your consciousness has never been off. You've never been off. And also, you could infer from that you've probably never been on either until you have these breakthrough, elucidating, enlightening, lucid waking, lucid dreaming type experiences. Until you can take the conscious self down into the dream state, and until you can bring the dream state out into the real world, it's hard to say with any certainty when, under the lens of analysis, it's hard to say that anything that's ever happened to you has happened outside of your memory. And radical subjectivity is the concept that there's never been a break in your consciousness. Your childhood, where you slowly develop the function of memory, is just images in your head, and the future is the imaginings of what could be, and the data would suggest, if you look at it correctly, that you've never been unconscious and you've never potentially fully been conscious, but the former argument is more pertinent. Memory determines your state of identity. Memory determines what you think is happening. Memory determines who you are. Like if you had no, if you were to damage someone's brain and like in say like dementia, and they never get to update the program with where they are, they seem to stick in time, and this happens when people are dying as well. They sort of, what to quote Duncan Trussell, they spiral through time. Duncan Trussell's magnificent. I recommend looking at Duncan Trussell if you haven't heard of him. Spiraling through time, jumping through alternate dimensions, talking to people that are dead. Like the phenomenology of the psyche is unbelievably vast, and our only conception of linear time is through memory. And if you inquire into that, like, do you remember yesterday? Do you remember exactly what happened yesterday? Every single detail of every single day? No, you don't. And then even less, do you remember what you dreamt last night? Unless you've gone to a lucid dreaming state, wrote it down, figured it out. We're basically living in a buffered consciousness of assumption and memory that can be escaped through altered states. And then, unsurprisingly, once you escape the buffer zone of continuity of consciousness and memory and this illusory unfolding and mapping of things, you can move into the present moment where you realize, by virtue of the experience, you remember and realize that you are infinite consciousness. I'll be right back. Further to the point of the discontinuity of consciousness being an illusion, which was basically what I was arguing in the previous section, one of my favourite experiments that allows me to go into a lucid dream state and experience these fucking cosmologically unbelievable states of consciousness where I've visited, I went ranked higher and higher and higher and higher up through different states of consciousness whilst dreaming, leading me to actually meet other, for all intents and purposes, other gods in the dream world, and visit other planets, visit other universes, visit just unbelievable colours, light, shapes that rival the DMT experience, but having lived it out in extended states of lucid dream consciousness. Amnesia is a big factor in what's going on. I was trying to reference that before. It's like, what's that slur you said, like what you don't know could fill a library. It's like what you don't remember about your consciousness, and I've argued this in previous videos. Reality is a hallucination. Definitely watch that if you want to know more in a more coherent fashion about, pardon me, the structure of reality as I perceive it and understand it. We exist in a constant state of amnesia. Like what you have forgotten that you've experienced through these states of neural amnesia is more vast than anything you remember from your waking life. And I'll say that again. What you have forgotten that you've experienced is infinitely bigger than what you think you remember in a normal everyday waking state of consciousness. Big part of my philosophy of spiritual experience and relating to reality is about sending this silver thread out into the different states of consciousness. So taking my ego, my conscious forefront original waking state identity, putting it into rescindance in other states, and then weaving memory so that conscious waking, normal everyday waking state of consciousness, me, remembers more and more and more of this infinite expanse of cosmic with a K, of mental experience that is just like we dream in the womb. I made this in this argument many times. Like, we know, we think, I believe this is correct, but dreaming takes place in the womb. So before we even had an external world to experience, in this pre-Euroboric womb, the paradise of the womb state, we were dreaming. So what would we have dreamt about had never, as a biological organism, having never experienced the real world, ever? If we're an original dot of consciousness that was generated by physiology and biology and materia originally, if they're dreaming, what are they dreaming of? Like, and then basically transitions between states and amnesia between states almost guarantees that, like, of the, say you sleep 8 hours a night and you're awake for consciously in the waking world for 16 hours a day, but that if you track through the experience, you'll recognise that the dream state, you could live like 3 months, or like people talk about salvia trips, DMT trips, where they've had like an entire lifetime unfold on DMT or salvia, and then they come back, and then it's suddenly they're back as their original waking self and can report that. And it's not that uncommon a phenomenology of those drugs. It's not a baseline assumption, it's not a universal, but it's a recurrent one. I'm sort of arguing that the library of consciousness that you've got access to, until you can go into the lucid dreaming state or the lucid waking state, which I would say is akin to enlightenment, we forget that we're gods in the literal sense. Like we are infinite cosmic beings with a K, the cosmos. We're mentally infinite beings that then come down into waking state of consciousness. The suit comes on, the headset comes on in this biological, digital, electromagnetic reality, and we inhabit ourselves, or our consciousness becomes cognizant of this world, but that as we're taking your waking self down into the dream state and becoming lucid and expanding and having these unbelievable experiences that you can't even retain when you wake up because they're so powerful, similarly to psychedelic drugs, this strongly infers that, to my logic, this strongly infers that we're infinite consciousness having a finite experience, and that there is material data for this, that there is, as a matter of subjectivity being the prime force, consciousness being prime, and we're in this radical state of subjectivity where we realise that everything we've ever experienced is taking place within our own subjective experience. Therefore, the validity or the supposed objectivity of the universe being measured exists within subjectivity, and then due to basically memory loss, I can evidence this. So if you wake up from a dream, you'll remember phenomenologically bizarre things happening, but then they fade and disappear. Waking life is like that as well, and we're basically gods with amnesia. I did make notes about this. What did I put? We are dream-weaving gods that exist in a state of perpetual amnesia. The second we remember, our entire perspective of reality is fundamentally altered until we forget again and again and again. That's why they say enlightenment is a remembering rather than a new information. It's a remembering of that which we already understood inherently at the fibre of our being. Enlightenment, or spiritual awakening is in general a constant process of flux between remembering, grasping, identifying, and then forgetting ad infinitum. That which we seek evades us instantly the second we identify with it. Therefore, awakening is to submit to who we are without identification. Subject becomes object until all that is left is radical subjectivity, which is the ultimate nature of everything we've ever known, total and utter subjectivity. I'm going to come back to more of this writing in a minute. I'm just going to catch my breath. Cheers. To further expand on this, I had a document up here. I've been free-forming this rapidly. You can see I'm really, really full of adrenaline. I'm really psyched on this subject. This is my favourite topic. It's almost, I would argue, say it's a bit like when you have this realization, you feel like you've solved the universe, because you literally have solved the universe. Like, you figured out your place in the universe. You figured out and it's just such an unbelievably overwhelming thing when you suddenly realize everything you knew was inside out. You're not a conscious agent acting in a separate, distinct universe. It's like the universe is a happenstance of your consciousness, and that we're all that same thing. And this is why in the previous video I'm arguing about the sort of making the allusion to the idea that we're all one electron in superposition. I'm not saying that as a literal thing. I'm saying that as like a metaphysical structure of understanding that everything you've ever experienced is happening in your own consciousness. And then, like in the lucid dream state, where like if you're acting in the lucid dream state and you're like a God that is controlling and generating everything. And we know that's a potential experience of consciousness, to be an infinite creator God that moves at the speed of thought. And when you've had these lucid dreams, it becomes so much more obvious. But once you realise that's possible just within the sleeping state, and you start to bring some of those perspectives back, you realise that this is a limited state of consciousness in a concordantly hallucinatory universe, a bit like a dream. And then that leads to these quasi-supernatural experiences that are basically you taking the lucid dream state as the baseline of reality, as the ground of reality, taking the lucid dream state as the fundamental state of consciousness, which is an infinite creator God with unfathomable power, and then trying to bring that transcendent identity down into a more limited, more collective state of being in this reality that appears to be objective but is also just another form of dream. I hope people are following this. I'm speaking really fast. Right, I've written here, this will ground me a bit. Radical subjectivity is in essence a continual fluidity of conscious experience, such as that one can weave a thread through as many states of consciousness as possible, whilst fully accepting the nature and the reality, but the nature of the psyche we currently occupy. To become one with God, or to become enlightened, or to become one with all consciousness, is a state of memory. It's a recall. It's a remembering our nature. You're awakening to a state of cognition of pure consciousness within a conscious being, which can be life-changing, permanently life-changing, life-altering, and profound, but it's also like a cessation of resistance. Like every time I've gone into a kind of profound state of awakening, it's the opposite of tension. It's like a deep state of release. Like after a DMT smoke on the beach, and I came back with not a full breakthrough dose at all, but this again many years ago. Don't use drugs anymore. Just naturally as a trippy as a person. I came back to the stillest ocean I'd ever seen, like the clearest sky, the absolute perfection of an image, like of an experience that could be had. Smoked this little pipe with THX theme going in my head, didn't break through, came back, and just, this has happened on innumerable occasions, the complete cessation of all resistance to the nature of reality accompanies this sense of remembrance. It's a sense of almost comedic relaxation of realizing that, like, I was always this one conscious infinite entity. I remember now, and I've just been in this neurotic kind of quixotically neurotic expanse of distraction and buffer zone and thoughts, just cycling through your thoughts, endlessly cycling on this like sort of treadmill of bullshit and nonsense. And then you just get the cessation of effort. You get a complete sense of non-resistance to everything that is, and that seems to be concordant with a profound sense of realization that, not for everyone, but for a lot of people, that we are all one. There is no birth, there is no death, there is no life, there is no life, there is no anti-life, there is nothing but our subjective experience, and that 99.9% of all our problems exist in prediction of the future or memory of the past, none of which really exists to the fundamental part of our consciousness, because we are in that sort of Tolle-esque infinite now moment. We are an untouched, ever-present conscious soul, or conscious spirit, or further back, ever-present witness. We are simply just taking a ride, and that everything else that happens, all suffering, is pertains to resistance to what is, rather than acceptance of what is, and that what was ugly becomes beautiful, what was beautiful becomes ugly, and so you get this radical sense of subjectivity, oneness, and equanimity to all of reality. And if you explore in that from that frame of reference, your memories and everything that's ever happened to you, you realise that, like, essentially, you know, whilst enlightenment is an extremely privileged first world, first order state to be able to access, you're not in a war zone, you're not being horrifically chased with guns every day. It's a very privileged position to be able to put yourself in a position where you're so peaceful and relaxed and non-resistant that you realise the inherent, ultimate, disgusting perfection of the beauty of the horrific, uncaring universe. Like, it's a profound state of realisation, and that's sort of what led me across multiple times to be in this state of an aeronaut's like a dream traveller. I've been blessed and cursed enough to recognise that this is a dream, I'm a dreamer, and that all of the states of consciousness that are privy to me, which are always forgotten through amnesia, through transition between different states of consciousness, point to the fact that life is but a dream, as stated in the previous video. Right, I'm going to come back with a conclusion and then calm the hell down, so see you shortly. So, along the lines of this podcast, I'm probably, like, I'm stream of consciousnessing now, which is obviously probably quite an obvious thing where you can see how excited and animated I am talking about this. This is my favourite topic. Radical subjectivity is basically, as far as I can tell, the solution to the problem of consciousness in the first place. And I would very much love your thoughts, feedback in the comment section. I'm probably going to make a separate episode that's not part of this original series, where I just address every single comment that was put in that video, on that video, because you all have recommended innumerable philosophers. Some like fantastic questions have come up. I just wanted to get this video done that I was originally going to do, spamming this radical subjectivity concept, and then I can sort of unpack it later on. But we had I don't know how many of them were me, but I addressed a good 40% of them. 231 comments, 6,455 likes. Views, 301 likes. I'm getting comments coming in every single day. They're invaluable to me. You're all amazing for getting this far through that. Watching the previous video, getting this far through this one, I really appreciate it. I'm sorry I'm not very coherent. This is probably the most intense, exciting subject for me that I've ever come across, because it does feel like, if you invert that supposition about the nature of reality and you take the lucid dreaming state as the pinnacle ground of reality, and then everything else is an emergent property of pure, untethered consciousness, it seems to be the solution to innumerable cognitive and mental and seemingly objective complexes that develop about, like, what is our place in the world. So I think therefore I am, I think not, and I rapidly disappear. Thank you for watching. I've been David Bradley. This is from the Mind of Mystic podcast. See you in episode 3, which I haven't quite formulated what that'll be. And then, get at me in the comments, like, share. Please share this video with anyone that you think might find it interesting. Oh, and a little shout out to a woman who came to me at the festival I just got back from, which was Elementary. That was sick. Played a hip-hop set with a friend of mine, Miss Unity. Sick. Really good fun. Great weekend. But someone had seen the previous video at the festival, and that was really cool. So just a little shout out to you. I didn't catch your name, I apologise, but there was a lady that came and approached me, so thank you for reaching out to me there. Thank you all for watching. I'll see you in part 3, which is yet to be decided on the exact title, but it'll be loosely, I would imagine, explaining in more detail, more calmly, more coherently, how I reached some of these conclusions and the experiences I went through that led me to believe that radical subjectivity and consciousness is prime are the solution to all understandings of reality, because everything else that's ever happened emerges from your one consciousness, which is the biocentric center of all known existence. And I'll see you in the next one. Get at me in the comments. Peace.